When you come on the trading floor and you're absorbing your boundary, you're absorbing the expertise of the floor, you're going to get lost. And that's part of the process. Now, when you get lost, you have two choices.
One reaches the point where you can't do more work to directly improve yourself. Then you need to think of these alternative ways of how can I use my limited time and energy to improve my game.
Check out 8 out of the 10 things that don't resonate with you. Take 2, go deep with them, move them from system 1 to system 2, and then make it your own. And that becomes your new baseline. And so this is what he's been doing. And this is how he's accumulated his skill assets, his edge assets over the last 15 years. And he's evolving it to where today, at the moment in Cyprus, he's going on his next little journey of where he needs to get to become now his target of being an 8-figure trader. This chapter, it's for those traders out there who are establishing or trying to establish a path going forward. And how do they best go about taking the lowest lying fruit in the financial markets as a day trader? And he has been able to extract through a very long career now. He's one of the very few. And if you were to look at his equity curve, his variance is minimal. It just looks like a stepwise movement to the upside with drawdowns of less than 2% in a 15-year career. But this is a chapter, and probably the most important part is for those traders out there who are on their last legs, who have pushed the envelope of their financial means, who have come to, whether they'll make it or not. Now, this trader still had no plan B. He wanted to be a trader. But it's for the people who want to have a plan when the end seems near. And what does that do to you when the end seems near? Because there are a couple of choices. And the choice that he selected, which we'll be speaking about today, is the choice that will accelerate you getting to back to black. And so after, multiple months, I think it was approximately a year where he was negative. He was down on account, approaching 30,000 down on account, and he was near his end. And what do you do when you're at that moment, when your equity curve is at its lowest of lowest points and the pressure is significantly on? And that's what this is a chapter if that's you as a trader. What do you do from here?
Absolutely. And it is absolutely, look, there's no exaggeration what Alex just said. He was taken to a room with the manager at the time, and with him was another trader who you'll meet later in the book, the Sphinx. And the manager first of all fired the Sphinx on the spot, and then turned around to the collector and said, "You're next in a month's time if you can't turn it around." And lo and behold, 3 months later, he was going from down nearly £30,000 to flat on account within 3 months after more than a year, probably closer to 2 years, roughly in that space of consistent struggling and just unprofitability and just a lack of traction. And since that moment, he has been up on account ever since. No down months. And roughly speaking, and especially in the, in the very difficult years to come within the 2010s, he was up, 50 weeks within that year. And the weeks he was not up, he was down a very insignificant minimal amount. So that's the kind of trader we're talking about. And just to wrap up, for people to place him and to understand him, we're talking about a trader who started in 2007. He's been around since then at a prop firm that Alex mentioned that is no longer in existence, but it was the same floor as a lot of the traders in the book started at. And of course, you've met already through this video, for example, the Razor. And by all means, the collector's, very much in the camp of a multi 7-figure trader. And he is, beyond all his statistics that we've quoted, probably the most consistent trader at the firm, bar the Razor. However, unlike the Razor, he also is a lot wider in his repertoire of the kind of trades he takes. In that sense. But he has seen everything. He has seen everything from the tailwinds of the prop industry growing after the, 2008 crisis, 2009, and has then seen the huge decline and collapse in the mid-2010s. And that has really influenced his understanding of what it means to survive and thrive and grow your career which his chapter goes into. And yes, that is essentially probably the collector in a nutshell. He is the composite, the collector of just so many different edges. He said he has a very scrappy style. He has this toolbox of trades in his head that he has just sort of pulled and molded and put it all together and forged a very unique trader. And that obviously then launches us into his ability to learn from those around him and so on. But I'll wrap that up by saying, Alex, he was also the foundational person that came over here in Cyprus with you to launch that floor those few years ago. So I think the first thing is we very much need to discuss first is what you mentioned about what happens to a trader when they find themselves, when their back is against the wall. They have run out in terms of time and financing, or the financial situation is really starting to pressure them. And that leads to a very weird, counterintuitive place. And that is often, I think, not very much discussed. In fact, it is something we've actually labeled in the book called the trader's resource dilemma. And so going forwards, we'll refer to it as that. And the trader's resource dilemma is as following. Is based off this idea about Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law is that the work needed to complete a project will take exactly the amount of time it's allocated. If you've allocated something to take 3 weeks, it'll take 3 weeks. If the same project is given three months, it will take 3 months. And perversely so, it's actually the same with a lot of traders in the sense of where everyone knows very well. Everyone watching this video right now will know that the common advice is give yourself enough time and give yourself enough money to learn in terms of, your financial sustainability. And that's very much the case. But too much time and too much money without being pressured for both will probably result in the same thing, as much as having too little time and too little money. So both extremes, too much time or too little time, and too much money or too little money will lead to the same outcome, meaning you're not going to make it. And this is a very consistent pattern. The book is all about looking at these kind of patterns and things that make or break careers. And that's the weird effect, this counterintuitive effect, where having a final moment, this finality, this cutoff point, is what actually turned around a lot of careers for a lot of people. For the collector, it was you're gone in 1 month, you're fired if you don't turn it around. For other people, like the warrior, he had, he just said, I'm doing pretty well, but it's not good enough. If in a year's time I don't do much better, I'm going to quit. It was that kind of finality in that case. So whether it's manufactured finality or whether it's forced because of the situation or given, a time limit, that has turned around a lot of careers. So it's a crazy thing to say. You got to give, the only outcome, Alex, is we talk about in the book is you need to put yourself in the position of resource strength. You need to give yourself enough time and money, but you need a very definitive timeline to force yourself to cut the slack, get serious, and get moving. And we see that in the collector story where he was just a junkie. He said how much he loved trading. He still does. And he was just doing everything and anything one can do. But it allowed too much slack in his trading. And he, that was evidenced by his big drawdown. Of course, that's also a big learning period and so on and so forth. It's a very complicated subject, but one cannot deny the power it had, because the moment that manager told him, you got to turn it around in 1 month, he said, the shackles came off. I felt I could really go for it. And he really did. He just went up to the most consistent trader in the firm and he said, where are you making money, not how? Meaning he wants to be pointed to the hunting grounds, but not be told, not to be fed his daily fish. He did the homework himself, but he said, where are you guys making money right now at this moment? It turned out at the time, by pure coincidence, to be the Chicago PMI trade. He started trading that and literally nothing else. Then started trading some price order flow anomalies in the DAX and nothing else. And he was very, very strict with himself and said, that is the best place I can get the most amount of positive P&L for the least amount of risk, and he will trade nothing else. And he did exactly that for the next following months and resurrected his account. And that sort of colorized him really for the first few years of his career. And as I said, from then on, he went to have literally multi-six-figure years, year on year, and then just went on from there. So it's kind of like when your back is against the wall, is kind of finding a way to do it. It's the ultimate forcing function, but it's a very perverse, counterintuitive thing in this trading domain. Hence the trader's resource dilemma, because there's no perfect answer for it. And it always manifests in very unique ways in that trader's career. If you're enjoying this discussion about The Collector, one of the traders in Traders of Our Time, and you want to go deeper, head over to tradersofourtime.com to sign up and get Chapter 1 for free. You'll stay in the loop with exclusive content, insights, and updates, and you'll be among the first to read the book when it launches on March 27, 2025.
That resource dilemma, for any trader, you want to see their reaction function. You want to see what all of a sudden when those constraints start coming in, because constraints is such a creative burst. If you're allowed to be constrained, you have to find solutions. As you mentioned, when the resources are too expansive, you're not going to be as creative, just the nature of the human spirit. And so how are you leveraging that constraint, that finality? And he's incredibly resourceful. Now, over and above, the collector is also a student and a keen observer of what happens around him, around the industry, the nature of the industry, why people have failed. He understands survivorship bias or non-survivorship bias. He observes it. He sees why trading floors collapse. What are the seeds for those trading floors collapsing? And he galvanizes all these observations. And Josh Waiskin speaks about it when he's watching two Brazilian jiu-jitsu individuals, sparring on a floor. And whilst he's watching them, the student that learns the quickest is the one that can embody the pain of the person that he's watching, as opposed to him having to experience that pain to take the lesson. So imagine the compounding effect of seeing other people's mistakes. And not many people do that. The ability to see others' mistakes and not make sure that you repeat those stories or those narratives that don't lead you on that path to performance and profitability. And what's fun, that trader at that time, the mechanism, when he understood that the finality was coming, he released the shackles, as you mentioned, the resourcefulness of then going where he was maybe communicating with his fellow grads, this horizontal integration or this transactive memory that is going on. And, Anne Murphy Paul, speaks about the three various modes of cognition and accelerated cognition, and them being, and so he went from the horizontal and immediately he got resourceful. So for those junior traders who are on a floor or in the digital domain, how are you finding someone that maybe if you remote retail trader, you're in a Discord community and you are learning horizontally for a period of time, but now you have to perform. How do you create those vertical integration points with people with expertise? How do you find them? How do you source them? And so he went mining for those vertical integration points. And that was the mechanism, resourcefulness, when it's constrained that, okay, for the last 18 months, I'm not getting anywhere in my trading. How do I plant it towards the upside? How do I grow my trees up towards the heavens? And how do I gain that understanding from the vast knowledge that's above? And so he plugged into, this is the non-linear aspect of development, where monetization starts, the curve of monetization starts meeting and starts shaping itself towards the curve of your skill development. And slowly, as he started just being hyper disciplined and focusing on those two areas that you mentioned, the anomalous order flow patterns that were happening on the DAX at a certain part of the day, a certain data point that he would just focus on, being religious, disciplined, his career changed going forward. And so that resourcefulness and that bedrock then formed his ability to cast a certain fish or a certain technique whenever he's needed to evolve in every adaptation period in the market of the last 15 years. And so that's been fascinating to watch, and how he's also navigated within a floor. He's located centrally prior to starting the Cyprus floor. But he's also a deep understanding how a community creates the power of the one and the group. And so he ensures, when we moved to Cyprus, he was the one, Alex, let's go start a new team, new floor. Let's build on what we learned in London and let's transcend performance. And part of that process of transcending performance is, well, we're not going to have as many experienced guys. You're going to be plugging out of this expert matrix that we had on the London first floor of a group of 7-8 figure traders, a collective P&L of 9 figures within one trading floor of approximately 12 traders. And so plugging out of that and coming into Cyprus was also a leap of individual faith. But he quickly realized there's always been the death of the trader who goes remote, who goes to some sunny climates. We've had these moments of the last 20 years where traders go into tax havens. And he said, the tax effectiveness of Cyprus is a sideshow. It's a side benefit. We're there to perform. We're there to put in the hours. If we've had a bad day, we're not going to the beach. We're not going to the golf course. And as a result of that, he ensured that he wanted to build an ecosystem that was rich in vitality and edge, but also understanding that he might need to do it with younger traders. So he took on a lot of responsibility of developing, even maybe at the sacrifice of his own individual game for the greater good in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, that we could have this really let's use common AI language, multimodal network of traders operating as one singular organism and the ability to penetrate edge when the markets, now we're in the Trump era. And so it's been incredibly exciting to see his resourcefulness, his ability to understand the power of the collective, his ability to collect edges within the group, being hyper curious. And still, when he moved to Cyprus, he made sure that he maintained his digital relationships with the senior traders back in London.
And that's very important to note, Alex. When you say going remote, it's less about in terms of I'm a remote trader, but it's more about disconnecting yourself from what you once had. So you can maintain that relationship digitally. That's the crucial difference. But it's those people who forgo the discussion and talk and the connections in the first place. And I think that's then the perfect way to then discuss, I think, the whole main thing about the collector, his ability to synthesize and learn and all these things. And you mentioned, Annie Murphy-Paul. Annie Murphy-Paul, who wrote the book, The Extended Mind. And we leverage her work extensively in the collectors chapter. And I just want to read a quote from traders of our time very quickly. And this includes you, Alex. So I won't let you quote this because you'll just be talking about yourself in third person. So I'll quote you here. So again, this is a quote from traders of our time, the collector. But his true edge, Haywood explains, is that he is exceptional at using the nature of the trading floor to learn optimally from those around him, repurposing this knowledge into his personalized, ever-growing toolbox of trades. His implicit learning is incredible, Haywood said. He is the best I have ever known at this, the way he creates his environmental learning through observation, listening to it, and yet has the discipline and the foresight of understanding what to filter out and what not to do, and I stress not. A procurer of ideas, curator of observations, the collector of market experiences, and a student of all. So again, and I think this is the key thing we need to highlight. 2 things we need to highlight. One is understanding that just because you're soaking in everything from everyone does not mean you should then let them hijack your processes. And that's a very useful and specific term that you've often used, Alex. And often that is the harder part. I've personally suffered a lot with this. I think I was a very good funnel from learning from people around me, but I was a very bad filtering mechanism to understand what not to take on. And then you just get hijacked by different processes and ideas and so on, and it gets very messy very quickly. And secondly, I will note to all listeners right now is the fact that just because we're talking about the collector doing this does not mean he's the only one who learns from those around him. Everyone does this. And the faster a trader improves his ability to do it, the faster they will actually become profitable or accelerate his profitability. The collector is just the purest model you can see that in, hence why we're discussing this with him, and the chapter goes on about this. But this is a fundamental, I will say this is, and you'll agree with me, Alex, I'm sure, this is a fundamental key skill for any trader at any time. Because, going back to Annie Murphy-Paul, is that so much of learning is social learning. And as you said, she uses these phrases, thinking with experts and thinking with your peers. And, she goes on in the book to talk about how it's all, through imitation and mimicry and learning and so on. And we use her book to make very explicit and formal what we've observed empirically ourselves on the trading floor and from everyone we've understood. Can you tell me maybe his very early days at Axia? Because that's when he was in a very transitional part of his career, when he was evolving his game. How did you see him go onto the floor and suddenly learn from, let's say, the engineer, which was a very different skill set than what he was used to, or the hero? You know, he brought up the hero quite a few times. How did you see him talk with them, discuss with them, and perhaps explain it to them in a way where you'd want to see a new grad replicate what he was doing at the time?
Yeah, he truly is a model for all of our junior traders with regards to the learning path and the learning process and how you can accumulate those skilled assets over time. But this is, I just want to reiterate that this is a trader, and I just, going back to right to the beginning, this is a trader whose largest up day is approximately $500,000, okay? And his largest down day is around $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
Huge variance. There's also a trader that understands the concept of on a master scale of nonlinear sizing, and his ability on so-called trades that aren't his top grade trades. Let's call them C grade trades as opposed to the top setups. Your A plus trades. Those C type trades where he's devoting 1/20th to 1/40th, 1/50th of the size he would devote to his A plus trades. And it makes you understand that all of these things that he's observed, he's seen around him, he's, assimilated, distilled and observed these patterns of performance. And he is a trader who has gone through this lineage of acquiring from his early days at his first training floor to his transition to the next training floor and then him joining Axia. But those early days at Axia, so I just wanted to give a bit of a backdrop there. Those early days at Axia, he opened up his collecting wings. He absorbed, but he was perhaps getting a little too overwhelmed with the variety of edge that was happening on the floor.
Yes.
And you described, your experience at the beginning. And so with any trader, even when we have the 7-figure traders join Axia, they get shocked in the system in the beginning. It's like the shock therapy. And part of that is an unrattling of what's possible. And then there's the FOMO element, and you just understand the human psychology in a new environment. And some people really struggle with that. Whereas the open-minded growth mindset trader who's coming, and I want to speak about an experienced trader. So this is, the collector coming onto an Axia floor with experience. And as he transitioned and he moved, opened up his wings, acquired from the profile engineer, the hero, alternative ways to extract edge from the market, and he got lost. But the journey of being lost is a path. You're meant to be lost. Like, in life, when you start as someone, you're a 20-something-year-old that had been, inducted, propaganded of what you need to do through your parents or your schooling system. Your soul is sent on perhaps a wrong path, and people feel terrible, but they feel lost. And I always say, the ones who are most lost are the ones that are actually on the journey of greater self-discovery. As the ones who find themselves too early, generally you have found yourself as a result of the public demands of who they think you are, not generally who you are. And so when you come on the training floor and you're absorbing your boundary, you're absorbing the expertise of the floor, you're going to get lost. And that's part of the process. Now, when you get lost, you have two choices. You revert into your shell, your ego, and saying, this isn't for me. I leave the trading floor. I don't need this. Or you say, actually, what is my method? How am I absorbing? What's adding more edge to me? Where am I struggling more? Why am I struggling in this area? And how do I distill it? Okay. And so that's what he did. So to summarize again, the collector at that stage, arriving on Axia floor, is that ability to collect chuck out 8 out of the 10 things that don't resonate with you. Take 2, go deep with them, move them from system 1 to system 2, and then make it your own. And that becomes your new baseline. And so this is what he's been doing. And this is how he's accumulated his skill assets, his edge assets over the last 15 years. And he's evolving it to where today, at the moment in Cyprus, he's going on his next little journey of where he needs to get to become now his target of being an 8-figure trader.
Absolutely. So I think, look, and I think that is best summarized in his words. He is he has a mental toolbox of trades, and he can even keep as if, something that was perhaps not even in play for 3 years. He can easily switch back and act on that kind of opportunity, very, very systematically. Okay, Alex, I think we can probably get slightly deeper into the extended mind by now me prompting you with 2 questions. So think in your head a recent example of a grad or a junior trader and a veteran trader, perhaps coming to Axia, or a veteran trader currently who both situations they might need to reinvent. And those people did that. And now they have become completely different traders. That junior trader has evolved into his more unique self. And another trader who is, he was already quite well into his career and then reinvented and now has really gone down that path. So think of those 2 people and explain perhaps how they engaged in their own way with the extended mind and perhaps why we can view those as models, but perhaps different ways in approaching it. Because really, I think one thing I should highlight for viewers is the fact that, and future readers, is that the way the collector learns from the floor, i.e. the extended mind, he still does it in his own way. And everyone does it differently. Some people might do it in a pure social sense. They might just have conversations with people all the time. Other people might, say, can you please share me your debrief? And that other trader he asked is very accessible. And you might give him his past 50 debriefs about some kind of trade, whatever that may be. And I think everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. I can think of one young trader in particular we were discussing on the Cyprus floor, who is always, you mentioned him, as a runner, our golden hair boy from Nottingham, who now works very closely with the Warrior. He was always very good in a social setting, always understanding, how he can create a sort of a bridge, a baseline with the other trader, and then just adapting slowly, putting himself in their shoes, So tell me, perhaps, maybe this is the person. Can you tell me perhaps a junior trader who has grown since that phase and how you've seen them interact with the extended mind of the floor?
Yeah. So the junior traders that make it generally the quickest have the most powerful leverage of their social cognition. And there's various ways in order to amplify your cognition. There's the environment, the embodied, and we're speaking here about that social transactive memory, and that's social cognition. And generally as humans now, you can be an individual that is more shy, more recluse. And at Axia, we try and provide an environment for those types of individuals through our learning resources, on our knowledge portal. But those ones who can create that embodied physical connection, those discussions, and you have to ask yourself, are you consistently auditing your cognitive practices in order to acquire a skill set as a speculator, as a trader? And so those practices and the auditing, because if you go to the pub on a Friday night to socialize, because the senior traders are going to be there, we're talking about the pub in London, and they go to a pub on a Friday night, and the discussions are centered around none other, everything else except trading. You have social, but not social cognition within the trading setting sense. And so therefore, a phrase that you develop, trade sense, becomes watered down. You're not giving your best chance to improve your trading intelligence within that social setting. So how are you going to get involved in stories? And so this young northern lad who's now being mentored by both the Warrior and the Collector, the northern can attribute his ability to use a lot of the Collector's edge assets to go flat on account, because the Collector is very good at taking to young traders, how do you take those low-lying fruit plays within a certain setting? You know, what we discuss actually in the Axia training program. And this young gentleman is very effective. If he goes out, he's going to have stories with traders. He's going to find out, well, what did you do in that area? Perspective shifting. Angus Becher talks about perspective shifting and hybridized thinking. These are all techniques within social cognition, being the meta idea. What are the techniques that you need to employ to get very effective in the ability to absorb, metabolize, or digest and metabolize, and then express the play? And so his ability to go have discussions, trading related in areas that he was interested in, then he's going to receive incredible amounts of bang for buck on that social transaction of accumulating. And so that's just a technique. Yeah.
And you see, Alex, this is very interesting because this highlights explicitly this idea that how do you foster your social link and your learning through a remote, in the sense of digitally. So obviously, you know, if you're on the floor, you speak verbally. Next to you, you meet physically. Now, you see this young trader, he physically grew up around the warrior when he was in London. And then I think he made a very productive shift to then still engaging with him very actively, but in a instant messaging, whatever mechanism that is, whatever platform or software, but he still physically engages him. And I think we've seen many examples of people who take it for granted that they will do that when they go remote, but they all of a sudden they stop. You don't hear from them. You know, they never message, they don't engage, and you can see very quickly how they're like there's some kind of, you know, like we said before, they're like a limb that's now was always attached to the trading floor, and now they've just been cut off, and they've sort of and that's just a product of them assuming there's some kind of there's more initiative taking required to maintain this kind of digital relationship, is what I'm saying. Which, to be honest, I think we've all seen in any social setting, not just trading itself. So I would highlight that kind of thing, you know, for people attempting it. Would you like to perhaps go on then to think of an older trader who had a career for a substantial amount of time, and then had either a crisis forced upon him by the industry change or something else, and then had to reinvent, and how he engaged with the floor? Of course, the collector is this person, but I'll just like to know perhaps a different example.
Yeah, so with regards to a trader that has performed extremely well in the past, maybe had a dormant period in his career, perhaps switch industries, financially very secure, maybe was coming just off his equity account high. So it's for that trader who has performed the early 2000s, then went on a walkabout or a hiatus or a career shift for a few years. And then that trader that comes back, that's a very difficult and challenging transition, because it's almost quite a few years in the making of them switching out of a high intensity pursuit, having potentially old dogma of what got them there, have missed those evolutionary phases. And when they come on the floor, it's quite a shock to the system of where to now if you don't have, because you know, in this current environment of being a trader, you have to have a large learning acumen as a speculator. Whereas in the past, you never needed that acumen as a speculator. You could just get by almost by brute forcing. It's almost like with these AI models now and all their benchmarks that they can pass through just, these mathematical Olympiad. They can pass through just pure computing brute forcing. We've had DeepSeek that's just come out of China, where they've used more intelligent ways to solve problems other than brute force computation. And so it's the same with the traders of the past, and making that transition. It's almost a re-education in how you learn, how you absorb skill sets. And very few are willing to go on that journey because they're looking for the immediate gratification of P&L. Whereas opposed to a trader who's a more experienced trader, who's going on his journey, has acquired the learning assets, his ability to make the transference is much more skillful and much more, they can almost receive that much more handsomely. Whereas that trader who's moved through the phases, if he's willing to dig deep for 3 years, and we've had a couple of them, very few, and I'm talking about the trader who was successful before, who then did a career switch, comes back again. That's a very tough gig, simply because it's tough to reconcile mentally. I'm wanting to go on a learning path first, as opposed to a monetization path, because you can get clouded. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's so much in that. And again, actually we discuss all these things in other chapters, but the crux of the matter is, I've seen this as well. I've seen this myself, directly, opposite me on the floor or something else, of them often doing the same thing they did before, and the markets are changed dramatically in many, many ways. And it's the classic story of now being the oldest in the room a lot of the time, or being, and having to sort of swallow your pride, learn from the young ones as it is. And, that's a classic human story in a lot of domains, not just trading. I think, Alex, that then perhaps, this aspect takes us very nicely into something to close off. I think the collector put it best. There is such a thing as hard edge, and there is such a thing as soft edge. And soft edge, to summarize, in effect, is how you can improve your bottom line through not the direct, obvious, absolute P&L numbers, for example. And I will best describe it as a direct quote from the collector himself. So, quote, "You may not be at the best of your game, and you may not feel at your sharpest, and you are tired, sometimes as if you are in the deepest hole," he said. "But you can be better this time in dealing with the situation and get the best out of yourself than you would have done 2 years ago. You are just trying to get the most out of what you are capable of right now to improve the little things, the soft edge." And that is in the context, and you could probably explain a bit more, Alex. This is in the context of the collector who suffered quite debilitating energy health issues. We discussed it in the chapter. He had an appendix removal, and through whatever reason, he was quite a changed person afterwards. He could go out all night, party hard, drink a lot. And now he discussed how, that life was over after his appendix, and he just can't do that kind of thing. And just generally, he felt a lot of his energy being sapped. He tried to deal with this issue in a myriad different ways. But what required was basically a whole new approach and understanding of the soft edge. Like if you're met with a crazy situation and you deal with it really, really badly, and somehow you find yourself in a similar situation 2 months from now, 2 years from now, and you approach it in a whole new different way, perhaps by losing far less than you would have the first time, that is a huge improvement. And it's more about seeing, rather than absolute improvement, it's about seeing where is there leakage in your game, perhaps using this leaky bucket metaphor of like your skill set is a bucket and there's holes, and how you can fill up those holes, and that is soft edge. And the collector's chapter makes it very explicit. And I think this is something a lot of people will appreciate, not in their first year, nor in the second, nor in the third, but I think when they go to their fourth, fifth, and sixth year, especially when, one reaches the point where you can't do more work to directly improve yourself. Then you need to think of these alternative ways of how can I use my limited time and energy to improve my game. And that's soft edge. And the collector talks a bit about that. I want to close off before I ask you a question, Alex, about soft edge is, I think the key thing here is that if you can find yourself, if you're in a moment of weakness, if you find yourself in that situation, and this time you had the personality shift and change to handle it in a better way, that just means you can now start trusting yourself. And if you can start trusting yourself, that is the first step in the road to consistency as a trader. And if you can trust yourself and you have that consistency, then you can add size and so on and so forth. Because I think a lot of the time, the inconsistency is fueled when you dig down deep enough by a lack of inner trust, a lack of trust in what you're doing deep down, And I think you can see that a lot of the time in how people trust that, I will do size on this trade. If I go offside and something crazy happens, I will have the mental clarity and fortitude to do the right thing at the right time. So, Alex, can you give us perhaps an example about how other traders have tackled soft edge, perhaps in different ways to the collector, and how, what examples of soft edge do you see in other traders, for example?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to soft edge, I think the examples of the collector are most profound because he's had challenges with his energy. And so, just wanted to maybe stick a little bit more on the collector, because I think the example is much more profound for people who are in a similar situation to him. Now, you got to imagine the path of a trader. That 15 years later, you've been sat at your desk, your spine compressing, 16-hour days, you become shorter by 3 centimeters over that period of time. The radioactiveness of the screens around you, just your physiological chemistry, such a word, changes and alters over time. And so does your emotional makeup. And so when the collector had his appendix removed, 15 years, out of screen, the body's changing, the emotional states, your gut intelligence is changing. And so a large part of trading and having a longevity is how are you consistently managing the soft edge. And so during this entire timeline and period, you're encountering always consistent, he speaks about it all the time. When he's been graduate, if only I was up on account, I'd be able to take more risk. If only I had a 100K account, I would be able to take more P&L on this. And here's a trader who has multiple 7-figure years, huge 6-figure days, who does not, or explains to the junior traders, it never stops. There's always something else that's bothering. Like he's, so for him is how he's maintaining his energetic state, where if he's tired, how is he ensuring that he gets back on the course the very next session, that he doesn't have bringing this depletion of energy the next day. Now, a young 20-year-old trader might not even understand this because he can watch the screen all day, but we've been doing 15 years. I mean, for our traders, we get Himalayan salt lamps to absorb the radioactivity, from around this, the area, ivy plants, just to create an environment that's a little bit more natural for the human body. And so this course of how am I going to manage a new experience that the next time round, as you mentioned, that you're faced with that experience, you just move out of the cycle quicker. So if you took 3 days that you took a loss, you were highly emotional, that the body's telling you some information there. It took me 3 days. What's the lesson? How do I do it in 2 days? How do I do it in 1 day? How do I do it in 1 hour? Where my recovery, because everyone's going to get into that place. As Novak Djokovic mentioned, how do you keep so focused for so many hours in a 5-set, match in tennis and come on top? And he said, well, I have all the same emotional reactions as all the other players. It's just my recovery is significantly quicker. And so when you're faced with a lot of these recovery issues from bad P&L, energetic state, so he's at that phase of how am I managing and understanding my body, whether it's through new Whoop technologies. And so those cultivation of those soft edges is effectively another word for deep self-awareness. And I think as a trader, as you master your timeline over time, you actually you're stepping towards, and we spoke about it in the last video, you start moving up through Maslow, right? Yes. And as you start moving through Maslow, you start creating this enlightenment aspect of your trading and this, the self-actualization. And that self-actualization is mind, body, spirit, skill. And during that stage, that soft edge is how am I navigating all these experiences as a human? And the trader who does that, who gets to that hierarchy, is a trader that has a 20, 30-year career. As opposed to those burnouts, we never acknowledge them. So imagine those I used to go out. Imagine English culture where we go to the pub all the time. Our social mechanisms, having a beer in our hand, having a discussion, you and I throwing some banter, classic English, expression. All of a sudden, he has to remove that from his life. His entire social identity changes. Yes. So think of all these things in order to keep a career, and you can't keep a career in trading. You have to either perform or you decline. There's no such thing as keeping a constant career. You have to evolve. You have to adapt. You have to develop. And so as he's navigating those arenas, and so, your question was, with regards to looking, the soft edge of other traders. One of the big ones is fathers. Fathers, and we speak about it with the Godfather and the Student, those two chapters, all of a sudden from being, 20-something-year-old to having 2 kids, 3 kids, how are you navigating the demands? And so what are you doing when all of a sudden your kids occupy all your weekend? You can't do your debrief on a weekend. So your focus and your intensity during the week is significantly higher. So the shift of focus, the nature of the intensity of focus changes. Those soft edges are super. So it's how you're deploying your resources consistently. And those deployment of resources is a product of or a function of your higher meta awareness.
Absolutely. And Alex, I think the best way to encapsulate all of that, it's another way to measure progress. Because if you're put in a position where the performance does not happen, and that leads to various conclusions, but at least that you know that you still improved your game by acting differently and better this time. And so it's sort of like giving yourself an alternative measure.
So important, yeah.
And especially, the longer you are in the game, there's an element of diminishing returns, maybe not, but like in terms of the things that you can do, in terms of, the work that you can do in any given day.
But those diminishing returns, as you have diminishing returns in one area, you should have increasing returns in another area.
Yes, it's where you can get alternative returns.
Yes, alternative returns.
And that's probably the best way. That's a different phrase for soft edge.
Yeah.
There we go. I think that's absolutely. Probably the best way to discuss that. And the longer you are in trading, the longer you have, the more of these kind of things you need to look at. And as you said, it's all about reframing the situation. Like the student who just, we encounter him just as he's become, at the time we interviewed him, I think he just welcomed his second child into his family, I believe. And again, it was him having to face very long nights, waking up 2 a.m. and how he had to change all these things. But he's always saw it as a strength because it's an opportunity for him to approach the game differently. And again, that's
look at that, those evenings, waking up, the child is waking up 2 a.m. in the morning, you're super tired. And how are you galvanizing that experience when, this is a young child, it's my baby. It's, a beautiful experience. I want to give the very best of myself in his, upbringing, but I'm tired. My frustration levels, they do this in the US Special Forces. They try and get them tired enough so there's more emotional responses. And then seeing how he's having to cultivate a character of patience whilst he's tired at 2 a.m. in the morning, that then influences trade day. But when he's facing those moments on a trade that he's being emotionally triggered, or it's our perspective, gets emotionally triggered, that learning or that Jedi lesson with his child, he can take those learnings and deploy them now into his training game. So the art of all the lessons of being a father and how those lessons can transpose themselves into the training arena when you put on a similar set of circumstances, tired, pressured, how do you not release yourself and scream at your child? How do you not result in going tilt on your trade? Yeah.
And again, and I think this will wrap it up very nicely, Alex. As you said, a lot of these traders are proving that this dogma, this understanding that, this previous cliche that trading is a young man's game, and, you perhaps it was a self-fulfilling prophecy because a lot of people expected that there's going to be burnout, I'm not going to last long. So you don't do all these things. You don't prepare yourself for longevity.
You don't prepare.
And that's probably a lot about what collectors about. To be honest, it goes fundamentally into the root of what traders of our time is. If we're making a book that's discussing the big things that make or break your career, the processes and the patterns that do this, you're reading it because you want to have a long career. You want to be understanding that you'll have to reinvent yourself many times over the longer your career is. And God willing, you will have those opportunities to reinvent yourself because you've had that career, and showing to a lot of people that it's no longer a young man's game. We have traders who've been trading for 20 plus years. They started a bit later and they're already old to begin with, or, they're all approaching, and pushing, I think the Razor is he in his 50s? Is he pushing?
Razor is turning 50 in August this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll wish him happy birthday when he does. And, and a lot of people will be hitting that area soon. And just imagine telling people 20 years ago that people will be doing that, you know?
The game, the edge, it's harder to develop edge, but you can stay at the top longer, like the current tennis players do. Djokovic's and that, they've been, Agassi was the anomaly back in the early 2000s, late 90s.
Yeah.
There's many anomalies now. It's pushing, and there are traders in the Axia desk who are from 15 years ago would be anomalies all over the place. Anomalies of having more children but having your best years ever. Anomalies of approaching 50 and having your best years ever. And so all these anomalous cases as a result of them understanding I can have an incredible long career, because the longer I evolve and adapt, the greater I'm growing as a human, because I'm having to evolve and adapt. And that's one of the greatest growth mechanisms.
Absolutely. So for those right now who are watching, understand that all we've discussed today is within chapter 3 of The Collector in the book Traders of Our Time, Navigating the Market in Possible Landscape. And that book will be out in March 27th, 2025. And if this has got you really wound up in terms of waiting between now and March, you can get a flavor for the book and a flavor for The Collector by reading a sample of chapter 1, The Trading Desks, and you can access that through tradersofourtime.com. It's only a sign up away, and that hopefully will keep you in the loop and engaged until March 27th. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bogdan. It's been such a pleasure.
Likewise, and see you in the next video.
See you in the next video.